Hello and welcome everybody. This is Grandmaster Sam Shankland here with Chess.com to record another video. And today I'd like to conclude my series on games I played at the World Open. Unfortunately, I won't cover my amazing last round draw with Abhijit Gupta, who I really wanted to beat because he knocked me out of the World Cup, but I mean I had black and he didn't really give me much chances, so I only held a draw. In any case, we're going to continue along with this game against Bachelin, this strong Mongolian Grandmaster. And he had just played e5 check, which was a move that when I played rook e1, I was anticipating preventing. And I had completely missed this idea until he had played e5. The point is, after rook takes e5, knight f5 check, let's say king e4, knight g3, my king can't escape perpetual check. Here and check. Here and check. And I'm getting checked forever. It's a big problem. So that seems like it's just a draw. Now, at this point, I was thinking to myself, okay, well, I could play king c5 and then king c7, and I might get myself mated, and I could retreat the king. But then after knight f5 check, I was like, wait, I might just be worse then. So I was thinking to myself here, maybe it's time to make a draw. I don't know. I was calculating. And I finally came up with a solution that I think retains an advantage, proves the e5 is a mistake, actually, and leaves white with very good winning chances. So why don't you guys pause your videos and think, well, probably you've had a very long time to think about it at this point because I ended it last time, so I'll just go right ahead. Okay, so rook takes e5, knight f5 check, and now a very strong move, rook 8 takes f5. And I think now white has very good winning chances because after a strong move, h5, we're getting this outside passed pawn. So, for example, like I was contemplating the king and pawn endgame here, but after something like this, I couldn't make it work. Like I get my pawn to h6, but he just sticks his king on h7. I'm tied down to this pawn. I have to be careful not to lose after like a4. Like after something like king f4, like b5. I can't run in to take the c pawn or anything. So like here and this, and I'm like. Or probably I should actually play I should play king h7 here, and then like king f4, c5, b5, c4, and like king e3. Now let's say like b4, and seems like black's winning. So probably white had to play king d4 in this position with the draw, but that wasn't what I was looking for. This king and pawn endgame, well, I couldn't quite make the outside passed pawn work because I couldn't win f5. But after the strong move h5, I'm threatening to make this king and pawn endgame. So like if black were to play like a4 or something, after it takes king e5, I'm just going to win this endgame very easily. It takes, and like c5, I run the king back this way, king here, and outside pass pawn. Basic principle. Like I'm going to play h6 at some point, he's going to have to run the king back over, and then I'm going to ransack the queen side. So he has to be very careful here not to allow the king and pawn endgame. So he had to play rook f7. Now this rook's on a very passive square. He's behind this pawn. He would love to just shove down the board, but white, of course, blocks it. Check here. And now, looking at this position, I was realizing to myself that I actually have very good winning chances. Because these two pawns on the queen side, or on the king side, excuse me, are excellent. I can just make a passed pawn on the outside, and he can never really exchange rooks. So, and his king is cut off along the e-file. So I thought that I was doing very well here. Now, in the game, my opponent played king d6, which I don't think was the most resilient. But if you were to play the move, let's say like b5, which prevents this pawn from being taken, white has a few options for how to proceed, but the one I was thinking was actually to play h6. And ironically, this is very similar to the endgame I got with Romanenko, because what we're seeing is after takes, I'm going to play rook h5 and make his rook passive. Something like this. But there's a big difference, is that I actually, like in my game with Romanenko, he was blocking my pawn on the 6th rank, and here he's blocking it on the 7th. Not only that, I've already cut his king off. I think that white is winning this position. Now, it's kind of funny to get like the same endgame twice, but like let's say something like this, and here, and we get some position like this one, and I waste a move. Like, black, I think, should just lose here. I don't see how he can save the game. Like, he's going to be in some kind of zitswang. Like, king up, and then this, and then here, and see. Should be able to win this somehow. Maybe after this I can just run toward the pawn, because he's put his king away. Something like this, king g7, rook somewhere, and then like this, and he has to watch out for this move. In any case, I think white has excellent winning chances here. In fact, maybe I can just play like rook h3, or like let's say queen the pawn, takes, and let's say, okay, king c4, rook h3, and I'm very much in control. He's not going to take, and if he plays king d4 to try to get c3, and I'm going to give a check, and then take, here, and then now I just run my A pawn, and once it gets far enough, I get behind the C pawn and take it. So that seemed like a win to me. Maybe black can defend better, but what I was really noticing was that I was able to Zugzwang his king because he just basically had no moves like in a position like this one. Like, if he plays this, white has a very strong move. See if you guys can figure out what it is. Alright, so I should play the move rook to d1 check and transfer the rook to d6, where it still protects this pawn, but now he's going to take this one as well and take all the pawns. So that would be good. I don't know, maybe in this position black could consider c5, but after this, like, what are you going to do? Seems bad. Can't move the king. b4, I'll just come back to c4. And, okay, takes, king c6, and like, rook h2 is a good move. Rook h5. Some Zugzwang is going to be losing this pawn on c5, which should be enough to lose the game. In any case, it seemed to me that this endgame should be won because I got the pawn so far advanced, but you know, it's still some tricks to be done. In the game, though, my opponent played king d6, which was a little bit more ambitious. Well, not necessarily ambitious, but like he's willing to give up the a5 pawn in the hopes of, I guess after rook takes a5, preventing white from playing like h6 and then getting the rook behind the pawn. So at this point, white has a key decision to make. There were three main moves I was considering. I was considering rook takes a5, taking the pawn, rook back to e4 to just collect the f4 pawn instead, and g6, which would counterattack the rook and gain some space. So as it turns out, g6 was the best move, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to play it. It just seemed like, I don't know. Like there was some line I was calculating, like g6, rook f8, takes, b5, rook a7, and it seems very good, but this one was concerning to me for some reason. To take the pawn, and king g4 is not working on kind of f3, but I missed this move rook f7, which, well, maybe we can exchange in king e7 here. I don't know, maybe the computer said g6 was best, but somehow it looked too messy to me. In any case, I thought for a while, and I realized that after rook takes a5, I should win the game. Now, my opponent played b6 here, which should have lost the game very easily, but the move I was expecting was b5, to cut off my rook from the 5th rank and stop rook a4. So if b5, we have a very difficult problem to deal with, because black is threatening the move rook f5, which will deal with my pawns very appropriately, and my rook is very passive. So try to pause your videos and think to yourselves, what should white play in this position? So the best move is very important. It's rook a8. So this is important for a couple reasons, but the main one is that we're meeting rook f5 with king g4. Now, with our rook on a5, this would fail to f3, because after takes f2, with the rook on a5, we get queen down. But here we have this check, which is very important, and the rook comes back to d1, and white wins. So rook a8 stops rook f5. And for the sake of argument, we're just going to say black played b5. In the game, he played b6, which is going to be the same thing, so I played rook a8 anyway. But after b6, I had an extra option of rook a4. I was concerned after rook f5, king g4, rook b5, but for some reason I missed rook b4, which immediately ends the game. Like, I saw b4, and then kind of the funny move rook back to f5, and I thought I was in trouble. Takes f3. Now let's say rook a8, because f2 would fail on account of some problem with rook d8 check, but after king d7, well, maybe here I'm just being silly, this is a win. But maybe king e7. For some reason I was having trouble stopping f2, which seems kind of strange. Check, and now king e8, but king e6 wins. I don't know, somehow I was concerned. But I mean, it doesn't even matter because we can just play rook b4. Oh, I see, sorry. After b4, I can even just play f3 directly, because now takes, we can take on g5. But after rook b4, the game's just over, so I don't know what I was missing. This rook b4 is just an easy win, of course. But instead I played the move rook a8, so we're going to pretend black played b5, because, it's the same thing anyway. So rook a8, and now another key point of having played rook a8, aside from stopping this rook f5 on account of king g4 when I do have this rook d8 check, is after black's best move, which he played king e5. I have the move g6, which is very powerful. Now, black would love to play rook f5 or like rook f6 here, but the problem is h6. And after it takes g7, we're seeing this really nice point of having the rook here. It's controlling the queening square. And here white's just queening by force. So, as a result, black's just lost. However, after g6, rook d7, a little tricky, because now we can't play h6. So why don't you guys pause your videos and see if you can figure out what white should play here. Alright, so if you want more time, keep them paused. White has to be very careful. Like, for example, if he gives this check, which seems very natural, black king just runs to the h5 pawn and he draws the game. Another natural move would be rook f8, cutting off the king and looking to collect f4, but then check, and it's actually really annoying, because this rook will like come to like g3 or something. Like, let's say here, check, and now rook g1, and h6 is failing, and we can just take it or something, and here, check, check. And you gotta be careful, like, I mean, even actually after h6, we can just take this, and probably black wins now. And in the meantime, this f pawn is very dangerous. So, and after this check, let's say we come back this way. Well, rook h3, and this pawn's going to fall. Rook h8 or something. King e4. Just threatening some checks. Maybe even king f6 is feasible as well to try to stay in touch with the pawns. Should be enough to draw the game. White has to find the only move, king g4, which is very powerful. This keeps the black king off of f5 and prepares for rook e8 check. So, and the black rook for the moment seems to remain confined to the 7th rank. As it turns out, he can actually move it because he has some checks. But, like, for example, if he plays, like, rook e7, you can just play rook f8 and collect this pawn. Again, king e4, we can also just check. So in the game, though, black realized the one drawback of this move. That's after rook d2. h6 is not as effective because we can just, I'll take this guy. And now this fails to rook g2. But we can, but white plays rook e8 check, and I confess I'd actually missed something. In my calculations here, my pawn was still on g5, and I thought black was going to resign here because he'd have to go to the d file and exchange the rooks, but king f6 is annoying. So, how does white continue now? Alright, so if you want more time, pause your videos. Okay, so we check from f8, and black went to e5. We can't take this yet. Some checks are a problem. Maybe not even, but something like this could be annoying. Rook f5 check, though. And now if king e4, we can take with check. And here after king e6, I did not play the best move. I played a move that should have complicated matters. So why don't you guys pause your videos and think to yourselves, what is the best way for white to continue to try to execute his advantage here? Alright, if you want more time, pause your videos. Best was to immediately capture the g7 pawn. The f4 pawn is under control. We don't need to worry about him. We want to take this g7 pawn and queen our connected passers. This was the way to go. However, I captured on f4. I was looking to play it safe. I'd realized that after rook takes b2, rook f7, I'm taking the pawn and I'm going to win. For example, let's say this check, king h3, rook g5, king h4, and ultimately he's unable to save the g7 pawn, and then I just win. But I was concerned that if I play like this, like somehow he's going to like harass me. I don't know. I don't even know what I was thinking. I was just being an idiot. But like, I mean, yeah, rook f7 was just much easier because this f pawn's under control. If I had done this with the king on e5, probably after this check, black's going to be okay. Or maybe not okay, but it's at least going to be messy. But after this check, I should just play rook f7. Instead, I took here. Now, okay, rook takes b2 fails to rook f7, but he played rook g2 check, which was the right move. And king h3. And now he took on b2, which was bad. But if he plays rook g1, this position's actually very tricky. I can't play, like if I play rook f7, for example, he's going to start checking me. And I can't escape them. Check, and I can't go to the f-file because we'll check and exchange the rooks, and probably the king and pawn endgame can be held. So, it is tricky to find the best move here. Ultimately, the move I wanted to play was actually probably not best. Here, I'm trying to remember exactly what I wanted. I think I wanted b3. I just wanted to play a4 and try to make a second passed pawn. But computer was laughing at me for some reason. Maybe I wanted a4 here, or something like that. I don't know. But I think white can still win if he's accurate. For example, I think this is a good idea. Rook f7, and now check and go to g3 with the king. So this check would fail to, like, let's say king f2, and then, okay, rook g5 takes, maybe a similar position. In any case, let's say black is collects this pawn, and then we get some position like this in rook c7. I thought white was just winning this. I'm going to run up and take the b5 pawn check here. Now strong move king g4. No, king g4 is not a strong move, it's a dumb move. No, b4 is a good move, and I'm going to play rook c5. And I think that I should win this position. I mean, I haven't table-based it or anything, but I think that should get the job done. But somehow, like, organizing this exchange should be good for white. Perhaps he can start with b4. Let's say this position. We can play b4 to freeze the pawns. I like this better. Because we're not really in any rush. Like, black can check all he wants, but when it comes down to it, at this point, he's out of check, so I can come here. So, and he's never really going to go after my queenside pawns. Like, in this position, if he plays, like, rook a1, I'll just play rook f7, and, you know, or, yeah, something like that. So, let's say, like, rook f7 now. Check, here, takes, king f6 here. And this extra tempo looks to be pretty big. Something like this. e7, king here. Seems like white's going to win. For example, if rook h3, we can take. And now if king c6, I have a check. And if takes, well, I'm cutting the king off along the c-file. So I should be able to reach the Lucena without too much trouble. Let's say rook b3, rook c4, and I should be able to reach the Lucena. Probably I could actually play b5 is better. But I don't know. Maybe there was a draw somewhere there. But I think that black has some chances to resist. But I remember looking at it for a while and deciding that eventually I should win. However, black made my life easier. He took on b2. Now, rook f7 is enough to win here, but actually black resigned after h6. He just missed this move because, okay, g takes h6. I play g7, and he can't stop the queen. Only other chance might be like this check, and then to try to defend here, but after hg and rook f8, it's over. So after h6, my opponent resigned. And I was pretty happy with the way I played this, giving back the, like, first giving up the pawn for to mess up the black coordination in our previous video, and then so then I only had an exchange, but he had two pawns. But then I even gave the exchange back to take back one of the pawns, and then quickly take back a second, and I even ended up a pawn in the end. So it was kind of, I liked the way I sort of transferred the position in terms of material versus positional values. In any case, I thought this was a pretty instructive endgame, and it sort of made my tournament acceptable. I still was nowhere near satisfied with my play, but I mean, at least I, gained some rating points, which is sort of been rare for me as of late. But, it was good, and I'm looking forward to now going to Europe. I will be in Europe for the next month. My guess is by the time this video is published, I'm going to be back. But, today is July 18th, and, yeah, I'm not going to be recording again until September. So, in any case, it'll be a break for me, even if it's not a break for you. So, okay, everyone, have a good time, and good luck. This is Sam Shanklin signing off.